So, first question I have today, Ezra, how are emerging AI music tools influencing the creative process for musicians? Kind of a big question, but it's the meat of what we should talk about.
So there's a lot of musicians out there who are resistant to generative AI, but feel okay using, auto mixers or stem splitters or more like sort of practical tools. What is that quote? Like a few months back, there was a woman who was saying, I want AI to do my dishes. That's more or less the attitude that I see from musicians who are kind of bearish on AI. On the other hand, you obviously have like the Suno and Udio crowds. We don't know that much about them, obviously. I mean, we can see what we can from social media and kind of like other signals that we may pick up on. But generally, I think you could roughly divide them into musicians and non-musicians, and setting aside non-musicians, so to speak, and just thinking about how are musicians using generative AI, specifically like state of the art generative AI music tools for creative processes. That's to me, if it's not the most interesting question today, it certainly will be within the next 1 to 2 years because there will be more and more people warming up to it. And I think you and I both know some top tier composers and producers
Hmm.
who are sort of in stealth mode already using these technologies
Hmm.
today. Some of the ways that I've heard people using it that are interesting to me outside of just generating a song, the obvious use case is sample digging. I think Google framed it as like AI crate digging. The idea being that instead of going into your local vinyl store and trying to find rare records and sampling the best moments from that, you would be going into generative content, which fortunately for you has no sort of licensing costs. And you can just grab whatever you want and flip it and sample it, and you won't have to pay any kind of royalties. And so there's this whole allure of the music you didn't have to create and produce, but that still sounds good enough to be able to use in your music. So that's certainly pulled some people in. There's the crowd kind of data bots and other people associated with stability who are using AI to put together like how would you call that? Like genre fusion or just like maximalist? Anyway, so there's experimental AI music artists like them. Lyra is a kind of famous character on Twitter doing more like, I wouldn't call it hyperpop, but it's really fast. It's not intellectual dance music or IDM or intelligent or whatever. I guess it's just like some form of really fast electronic music.
Hyper
So anyway,
something, yeah.
hyper something like basically cramming as many genres and different changes in as possible, because when you're divorced from the labor of creating a stack of stuff, you can go faster and you can build more. And so I think that's an interesting use case. Something that's maybe a little more mundane that people might not be thinking about is vocal correction. So let's say that you're working with an artist and 95% of their vocal take is usable, but there's a couple sections where it's just not quite off. And it's not just a matter of using autotune to pitch correct, but there's something in the intonation. Maybe you can EQ it and put on a compressor and try and get the enunciation of the consonants. But ultimately, you just wish you could have had a separate take. You don't have that. This one sentence was just so off that no amount of pitch correction EQ is going to fix it. But to get them back in the studio would be insane. And so we're just going to generate this with AI. That's like a professional use case today.
I'm just thinking that would be like the next logical step of Melodyne, be a tool that you could train on your own voice that you could then use to just improve your own performances or fix.
Yeah. And then what percentage of artist vocals can be modified before fans get upset? So nobody really has insight into the audio engineering process of normal records today. So we just don't know. We hear auto tune, we're like, oh, yeah, that has clearly been tuned.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I use those plugins a lot myself, and you can totally just use it 5 or 10% and it fixes it, and no one would ever possibly know. Even the original singer wouldn't know if she heard it herself. But what I was going to say is, over the years, that aesthetic of using autotune in extreme ways has become not only normalized, but preferred. But what I wonder now is, and maybe this is moving to another question, thinking about how the availability of these technologies is changing people's tastes or what people want. Because on a broader scale, not just looking at music, you can already see people are seeking out content that they know is produced by human beings, to
Mhm.
put it simply. And I do that myself. If I'm looking on YouTube for information, I prioritize information where I can see the person, and ideally I already know the person, but maybe it's a new person. Because when it's all AI generated content, even though it might be good or true, it's easier to just put in some false information. I feel like, at least if I see the person, I know they are warranting to me that this is right. You know?
Google has something for search ranking. It's called EEAT. So it's like expertise, authority, and trust. And
Right,
I think
right,
those are the same kind of benchmarks we look for. So it's like, hey, yeah, if there's a human and they look super sketchy and
right. That would be the
unreliable, and
same
like
thing.
they're a
Right.
trickster, and you know what I mean, they're trolling, then like I may be like, doesn't really seem trustworthy. So AI kind of feels like it would be really easy to just
Mhm.
spin up some content in it. And we know that LLMs hallucinate. And so even if the intention's not to deceive,
Exactly.
which
Yeah.
is I think kind of your point, you can still get misinformation.
But that, I guess where I was going with that is, if we look back at music, you and I have talked about this a little bit before. Is that going to lead back to audiences preferring music that you can audibly tell, or at least you would think was made by people? But I was just reading a thread on Reddit yesterday. This guy, he had a folk duo, and they posted a song, and everyone was saying it sounded like AI. And he's like, why does everyone say it sounds like AI? And people commented, I listened to it too. And it was like the way he produced it, he kind of overly perfected everything. And so it
Mm,
did kind of sound like AI. And
mm.
he was very upset because he said, I spent all this time recording this and everyone just said it was AI. So it made me think my reaction to that would be, as a musician, I want to put out things that don't sound like they were made by AI, you know? And
That's
so I
interesting.
wonder, is that going to lead people away from using autotune, for example? We've seen more and more
Mm.
autotune for 25 years, it seems like. But I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you see any signs of that
Yeah, I
going?
mean, it's an argument for empathy and, music as a social bond and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And so people want to feel connected to the artist. But I think a lot of people get that through other things. I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the way that a lot of us have been sort of retrained to experience music by latching onto icons and personalities, and the music is kind of a bait to bring you into the character or personality of the artist. If you look at TikTok dances and how those funnel up to the artist, and the artist has some crazy music video, and then they're doing their live streams, and that whole model of what it meant to be an artist in the last 5 to 10 years with social media is really different from what I grew up on. The bands I grew up listening to could barely find any photos of them, so you had to go see artists live, and you would bond through the music in the sense you'd be like, well, this is what the music means to me. Then you go to the show and you're like, oh, this is what the scene looks like. This is who rocks with this stuff. And this is what the artist was like when I saw them. And so you formulate like a very personal relationship to the music first, and then the audience and the artist. Now it feels like kind of the inverse of that, where the music is just a calling card to kind of hook into the personality of the artist and their merch and their tour and stuff, all that. So much music is so much more transparently like a money game in a way these days. Obviously, not all music, but I mean like commercial music, when we're talking about auto tune and pop music and that kind of thing. I wonder whether people are going to care that much about the presence of auto tune or the sound of an AI kind of thing if there's a personality at the end of the
Mhm.
rainbow who's engaging and human. Or even
Yeah.
not human. I think you and I have talked about before in Japan, there's the Tsune Miku, I think is it, or Mike
Yeah. I
Miku.
mean, everyone always says Hatsune Miku, but I can't see that being the majority of the music scene. I think there will be some artists like that, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, she's big kind of because she's a novelty also. Let me
So
let me pose this to you. Max and Steve and I talk about this stuff all the time, and one of the things we talk about is that the artistic process, it really is about the creative process, is really about the process of creation. And to me, it's like, depending on what I'm actually doing, am I working in the computer? Am I playing one of my instruments? Am I twisting knobs on some analog gear? All those things kind of lead me to different kind of creative spaces. Also, like, using new technologies as compared to using something I know really well, I've been using for years, that puts me in a totally different space. Or using something the first time, like, wow, what does this do? It's so magical. And for me personally, working with all these things, I tried the AI generation tools, especially when stable audio came out. That was the most interesting one that I've played with still till now, to be honest. That was like the AI crate digging concept that you're talking about. I really had fun with it for a few days, but I had this experience with the art models too. When I spend a long time typing into prompt boxes, it makes me feel kind of tired and have a headache. It doesn't really make me feel good like when I play the bass guitar. And it doesn't lead me in fun, kind of creative directions mentally. And it feels more like writing computer code or something. I'm constantly iterating on my prompt and seeing what it does. And most of the time it's not good and you have to do it over and over and over again. And then
That's why I like Udio.
why?
You know, oh, because I mean, every prompt output sounds like real music.
Well, I haven't used Udio, but like that makes me just think of like using Midjourney. Every prompt looks good. 99.9% of them look like something made by Midjourney that I would never want to admit to anyone else.
You gotta get into Udio and
Okay.
check it out. I mean, and they're not a client, and I'm not paid to say that. The way that they went about training their model is problematic, just like Suno, and that's why they've gotten sued. And so it makes it really difficult to endorse them.
Let's talk about a couple of things about those then, because what I would imagine will happen, and stop me if you think I'm wrong, but some agreement will be reached between them and the rights holders, and those things will continue to exist and will continue to improve. So I imagine we'll live in a world where great pop music can be made easily. And then what kind of music world are we going to see?
The great pop music is, to me, like the least interesting use case. The thing that I'm most excited about is film scoring, and I see all of this stuff converging towards AI video. AI video is going to become way more pervasive. It's going to be cheaper and easier to create. They're going to want to create stories, and they're going to need music to tell those stories effectively, just like film. And I see, like 3 to 5 years from now, a scenario where more and more people are trying to understand how film scoring works. And I just think that scores could see a renaissance because, for one, like you could be a musician, you can come up with a melody or a little chord progression, you could do style transfer with Udio or Suno or whatever, and you can start to get these more meaningful scores, especially with Udio. Like you can really, I've been experimenting with this at length, but like you take a simple chord progression and upload it, and you can dictate the genre that it moves into by using tags that represent that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I know that a lot of people are like, what do you're saying the future of music is film scores? Like, that's ridiculous. Like people like pop music, people like rap, people like, but I think that that's going to be true. One of the reasons I like Udio is because it just surprises me so often.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like,
That's interesting.
uh, yeah. And well, you think about hallucinations, like if you're coding, if you're programming or, vibe coding or whatever, or if you're writing a journalistic piece with an LLM, you don't want it to hallucinate. You want it to be logical and efficient. But with music, actually, hallucinations are great. Who's that cultural theorist? He says, AI is a regression to the mean. I don't know if you've heard that expression.
Eno was kind of saying that in that interview that I just listened to. He said something like, the greatest challenge I found using AI was getting it to stop giving me mind-numbing mediocrity. He
Totally.
said, yeah.
Like
That's how I
Douglas
feel
Rushkoff is
using
the guy I'm thinking
Midjourney.
of.
I'm like,
Mm.
like I know Midjourney can make cool things that you would never dream had been made with Midjourney, but most of the time it makes things that look like they were made with Midjourney. So it's
But
challenging all
that
the
really comes down to prompting. Like
Yeah, it
that's the
totally comes
thing.
down to prompting.
And
But
people, it's so easy to be like, this model sucks. And actually it's like, hey, maybe you suck at prompting.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
that's true.
you
But
know
the
what I mean?
models change and the prompting strategies have to change too.
Yeah. Well, the prompting, the strategies and also the keywords. I mean, the thing that's interesting about the way latent space and embeddings work is like the words you use matter. For example,
Yeah.
if the audio in the training set has like a certain set of tags on it, and you want to get that exact sound, if you know what those meta tags are, you have a much better chance of accessing it. So, when you're using Udio, which was it generally believed was trained on using Rate Your Music, you can go to rate your music and find the album that you have in mind, and then go get the exact
Oh,
tags
jeez,
that are
wow.
associated with that and paste that in. And you're going to get very close potentially to the sound that you're looking for. So, if you have a clear understanding of what the data was that informed the model, it's not just like prompting. It's being a good prompter isn't necessarily like I have command of the English language.
I
It's
see
like
what you mean.
I
That's an
know,
interesting point.
yeah, I know which tags are in the embeddings. And so anyway, I guess it's tricky at this phase because, most of these models are in a black box. And so you poke around a little bit and you go, I don't really like what's coming out of this. But the longer you work with something, like Suno, for example, I mean, if you prompt it with something like a really generic 2 or 3 word genre prompt, you're going to get something really generic. But if you kind of push the model to its edge, you can do some pretty interesting stuff. Understand how to prompt it, you can get closer to that and get out of the quantized stuff.
So I'm interested in your idea what you were saying about AI video and scoring, because one thing that I've thought the last couple of years since this all started, if you are a creative already, one of the effects of these things is it lets you create things in other media much more easily. If you've already developed the creative mindset and you kind of understand your workflow, then you can transpose that from music into video or even writing or art or whatever. And then the next level up of that is making like multimedia storytelling, where you're making visuals and music and a narrative, and maybe in a larger context of a larger body of work with a larger narrative arc, with maybe posting schedules and different platforms coming out that are tied together, like a larger work. I keep thinking that as the lower level tasks are automated, then it enables you to move to higher level cognitive tasks or creative tasks. So that's kind of what I see. Like as a solo creative, I could be like supervising the video pipeline and have my music written over here, and I'm like the larger creative vision. That's what I keep coming back to. It also kind of ties back to what we were saying about AI created video content before, like on YouTube. I'm just not that interested in AI content. Also, like, I don't care what it has to say about something because I don't know where that came from. Like, was it somebody spent all day using AI to do deep research and then create this whole script that's very like well informed? Or did they just type in ChatGPT, like, tell me something about Carl Jung, and then they just posted it in 11 labs and it just came out, and I didn't even know if any of the details are right or wrong. Like, I am quite
Totally.
interested in Carl Jung lately, and there's a lot of YouTube
Mm.
content about him. And there's a lot of AI generated YouTube content about him. So one signifier I found is when you hear it say you hear them say his name is Jung, then you know. That's actually become the case in a lot of AI generated content. As soon as you hear a mispronounced common name or word that you know, then
Right.
even because that makes
Well,
me
it's just,
think
I
at
mean,
that
this
point,
is this
okay,
is
I don't believe anything you have to say. Right?
yeah,
So,
no, I totally hear that. I mean, what you're pointing out is just like the trustworthiness of AI
yeah.
generated content is not high. Yeah, I agree. Say you're working on an AI video project in the future because now everybody can turn their ideas into movies in, a matter of hours. Can we find ways to create rich film scores by drawing from the shared harmonic vocabulary we have using audio conditioning? So like Udio and Suno both support this option, but like you can upload a clip. Let's say that like minor 2 dominant 5 progression where it goes back and forth and doesn't resolve to the one. Like that's a certain sound that I could easily knock out on my piano, even if I'm not that good at keyboard, fix it a little bit in my MIDI, throw some sort of string patch onto it, and then upload that and be like, extend this. And Udio will take that and make something like way more interesting. Right.
Right.
So it's
Okay.
like, and if I reuse that melody across different instrumentation and I prompt it differently, etc., I can actually create like a recurring motif that exists in this music that's all coming, I guess, first from me as a musician with my understanding the musical archetypes, but then into Udio where it's getting transformed through their embeddings, and then ultimately bringing back something that's somewhat novel, somewhat familiar, And then, that's how you can create a film score in a matter of, days potentially. And so then it comes back to your point,
So,
which is like, what is the
and
enjoyment
then,
of that?
what is the enjoyment of that? Was that what you were going to say? I
Yeah,
was going to
well,
say,
you said
what
the
is the
process.
music world like if you can do that in a world where I can make my own apps in a few days and you can make a film score in a few days and thousands of other people like us also can? Then
I think it's a good thing because I think that there's a lot of gatekeepers that prevent people with good ideas from getting their content out. And so actually, one of the promises I think of AI is a return to novelty,
yeah,
which is
that's a great
ironic because
idea.
a lot of people are like, oh, AI just spits out and regurgitates and copies. Like, no, dude, you're not using AI enough. Like
I mean,
AI
for me
introduces
personally, I
novelty.
feel like it's just been a rush of creativity ever since it started.
Yeah.
I just don't have enough hours in a day to do all the things that I'd like to do. You know?
Yeah, the licensing thing is the biggest issue at this point. I mean, if artists were getting set up with, like generous royalty checks, like imagine if instead of the Spotify kind of structure where it's like, well, we have to chop the pie up so much that like you're just not going to get much. To like, hey, there's so many people using AI and there's so much money flowing into this that we have the money to redistribute that to the original artists who contribute to the data set. And like you're starting to collect significantly more money.
I just don't feel like that's workable. I've heard that whole debate for so long. I mean, that's what,
Mhm.
when the internet was first being built, people were like, we'll have micropayments and that'll pay for everything. And we won't have to have advertising. And it turned out that keeping track of the micropayments was going to cost more than the micropayments were
Micropayments
worth
for what?
for everything. Like, I mean, that was one concept in the early internet was we'll have some system where if I click on your blog post, you get zero point 0.1 cents from me. But it turned out that that's just impossible. It's unworkable. That's one problem. And I also feel like the idea, like I've heard that idea, like, oh, we can listen to this AI generated song and then break down that it's 43% Marvin Gaye and 23% Nine Inch Nails or whatever. And that just makes no sense to me whatsoever because any artist you would name is just standing on the shoulders of the next artist below them, right? How far back are you going to go?
Like,
Musical influence is got to be arbitrary at that point.
yeah, it is, but we'd just be talking about, I mean, philosophically, I agree with you, but legally speaking, if they can solve the black box problem,
I don't
so to
see
speak,
that problem being solvable though. How can you, it's like saying, read this book. Oh, what were the books that he read that were the most influential? It just makes no sense.
I
You
don't
can
think
talk
that's
about it.
true. I don't think you're
No?
right about that because no, because remember I was talking about how the meta tags can place you in a very specific domain of latent space that then like pulls out the exact same. So those tags are pointing at a particular location in latent space, so to speak. And that domain is like made up of artist works. And so now it depending on how far you can drill into attribution and say, no, we literally took the DNA of this song, this song, this song from this set of meta tags. Or if you can just say, hey, we created this from this series of meta tags, like you have to decide how deep the attribution goes. But you may, for example, have a song in a pool that's in this particular small niche, and that's divvied up across X number of tracks. And it's this incredibly small fractional kind of revenue system that is cumulative. And so if you're in a small enough niche and you're a big enough fish, then you can make a more meaningful type of income from generative music. It's possible. I guess what I'm saying is like, I do think it's helpful, at least when we're trying to think about practical solutions, to separate what's true, which is that every artist is standing on the shoulder of giants and music is always sort of borrowing, etc., from the more mundane problem of like, hey, you didn't license the music that's in your data set. You didn't pay an upfront cost. So you've got to pay the people something.
So that seems more plausible the way you just described it. I guess I'd feel like even if you could do that today, won't those models just develop more and get more and more complicated and it'll become more and more difficult to do that? I guess what I'm thinking in your scenario, yeah, if you say my song was based on these 4 other songs, then that seems simple enough. But what if it's my song was based on these 4,000 other songs, which seems more plausible to me.
Well, it's actually what's interesting about these models is that you can't really nail one particular subgenre and style without it saying, hey, it's not all these other styles. In other words, like the negative,
Okay.
the
I heard
inverse of
that.
the style that you want has to also exist in the data set. That's why they always say, like, we need so much data in order for the
Mm.
model to be state of the art. So even if you only trained on 4 songs, or the genetics of your AI generated song is only these like 4 influences, which it
Right.
never
I
is,
see where you're going.
it's also inseparable from the millions and millions of other tracks that are in there that it isn't impersonating.
So right,
So
and so at that point, that's why it kind of seems to me like this is just unworkable in principle. I get that ethically we would wish that that would happen. I just don't know if that's really feasible.
and I mean, it's a tough call. I mean,
I
when
just
you
don't
get
see a
into, we
solution.
talk about, well, I've been kind of trying to hold down the solution that, people like Ed Newton Rex propose, which is like opt-ins, fair artist remunerations. There are companies doing this. They're not the big Goliaths. It's not Suno and Udio, but like there's Datamine. Their Combobulator has these things called artist brains that are trained in partnership with experimental electronic artists,
I've seen that. Yeah, that's pretty
Woog
cool.
and Mr. Bill and people like that. Yeah, and then there's, Lemonade is partnering with pop and trap producers to create, 4 and 8 bar MIDI sequences that, or there's New Tone, right, which does timbre transfer
Hmm.
that's trained on different artists. What's the other MIDI company with Ilya Tolnikov's company, Delphos, where it's like you have artists can come in with their entire catalog of a Pro Tools, a lifelong set of Pro Tools folders and just hand it off. And all that stuff gets converted to MIDI and then trained, and then they have like custom MIDI models trained on a particular producer it's more of a bespoke thing, right? So there's all these solutions that are being sort of like eked out into the system. The question is like, is there going to be enough money in that for people to be interested either? Like one of the appeals for venture capitalists looking at Suno and Udio is that, it's like Mikey Schulman, the CEO of Suno, when he got in trouble and was like, nobody even enjoys making music. It's too hard, right? People were like, you're an idiot. But I think what he was trying to say is it was like, there are a lot, like musicians love doing it, but there's a lot of non-musicians who pick up a guitar once and never do it again because they're just, I can't be bothered. So that's a billion dollar company to a VC person. They go, okay, let's see, it's $10 a month. There's got to be a billion people out there who,
Right.
would enjoy making songs occasionally. If we can just capture 1% of that,
Yeah, yeah, sure.
the classic thing, right? We'll recoup this $125 million investment in a year.
I guess ultimately what I think is that there's always going to be some people that try harder and work harder and put more creative juice into their projects than everybody else. And those people are always going to stand out one way or another.
Mm.
What I'm curious about, what I was trying to get at earlier about the autotune question is like, will people find different ways to stand out now? Well, they have to find different ways to stand out. Like I could see on YouTube, like you listen to these AI generations, they sound too good. It's not a person. So then if you're a person, does that mean, oh, I don't want it to sound too perfect? It's just like with the M dashes. No, like I am an academically educated writer. I use M dashes, but now I've stopped
Because this is right, because you don't want to appear like, that's funny. I actually do the same. I take out it. I like stopped using.
You have to, but
Yeah.
that's I don't know. That's the more interesting thing to me is stylistically, like what somehow people will figure out. It may be through making video also will be part of the story, but musically, like I feel like the completely digitally synthesized things that sound like they're completely quantized and perfected,
Mm,
like that,
mm,
like pop vocal singing that we think of, it's too easy
hmm
to simulate it. And then
Yeah.
are people there was an interesting debate about this on a Discord I'm on a couple of years ago where people were saying it's so easy to copy things. Like the only way to have your own brand that can't be co-opted and copied is your stuff is just too weird. Like you have your niche audience and it can never get bigger than that because you're just too strange. And that's a way of defending yourself against
I think there's some truth in that. I mean, we were talking about Douglas Rushkoff earlier in like the
right.
Keen Human podcast, the regression to the mean. But one of the things he said that I thought was really interesting, just to your point, is the most valuable thing about AI is it shows you what generic writing looks like in whatever you're doing. He goes, I was working on a comic book or something, or a film story or something. And he goes, I had written like a multiple pages, and I went to LLM to prompt it and see what it would do in this. And it wrote almost exactly what I wrote. And he goes, and then I look back at what I wrote and I go, God, my writing sucks. He goes, so it's almost like it's like a way of checking yourself and being like, am I being creative, or am I just sort of like doing the most average writing here? And so
I saw a guy yesterday that did a thing like that with Gemini 2.5, and he told it to write a story, and then the next day he came back and plugged the story, and it was like, critique the story, and it was like, oh, this is a terrible story. The plot is shallow, and all these things don't make sense, and the characters are bad. And
you created that. That's so funny.
haven't you tried to make a model that writes like you? Have you tried that?
I have, yeah, and it really didn't work. OpenAI has this like special sandbox that you can do RAG in. So I actually spent like 6 hours taking all of my blog articles and like, taking out all the paragraph breaks or replacing them with dashes and doing all the like technical stuff to get it into a single piece of code. And I uploaded that, and it was a ton of content. It should have been plenty to capture my voice and writing style. And like I followed a guide that showed me exactly what to do. And when I came out at the end, it was so incoherent. After that, I was like, wow, GPT-4o is actually a great writer compared to, it was basically like the quality of GPT-4's writing was so much more coherent. And like when it came to writing in my style, not only did it not sound like me, but it was also like, it wasn't putting together like the writing style wasn't easy to read, and it was making a lot of like logical leaps that didn't exist. I think part of the problem was that I write about new topics, like things that are just coming out. So when I asked it to write about something that like wasn't too well documented, even though I tried to use deep research, it was like, it was hallucinating all over the place, and it just didn't sound like my tone or like the way that I would write about things.
That's a wrap. Special thanks to Ezra Sandzer-Bell for giving us some insight on where AI music is headed and how creatives can stay ahead of the curve. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a quick rating, and share it with a friend who geeks out on music tech. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.